You're listening to the Curious About Screenwriting Network.
Hello, everyone, once again, and welcome to this edition of Page to Screen. This is the weekly podcast presented by the International Screenwriters Association, where two writers examine a movie or a TV show and its journey from page to screen. I'm Jeff York, your host as always, and today we have back with us a writer, a paranormal expert, a verifiable ghost hunter, and ISA bigwig, not to mention one of my favorite people in the world and one of our show's favorite guests, Mr. Scott Marcus. Welcome back, Scott.
I said last time, you got to give me a big introduction, you know?
I was going to say, the man I want to have my children, but that would have been really wrong, and I don't know if your lovely girlfriend Wendy would really approve of that, but there I said it anyway. I jest, my friends and listeners. But yes. Scott Marcus is a very awesome gentleman with so many interesting facets to his life. He's helping screenwriters. He's helping the film community. He's helping keeping us safe from all sorts of things that go bump in the night.
Yeah, no, I always love going out, visiting haunted locations, learning the stories, the folklore, talking to witnesses. I've been doing that for, I think, coming on 18 years now, something like that.
Scott,
that's always fascinated me.
It's incredible. I love reading your blog and hearing all the stories about what you tell us quickly about some fascinating place, a haunted house that you've been to recently that was quite enthralling.
Well, you know, I wish I could tell you that I had a paranormal experience here, but and to be honest with you, I haven't gone through the footage yet, so maybe I did have one, but just didn't know it in the moment. But we just did a paranormal road trip, the lovely Wendy Lynn Stotts, as you had mentioned, and I,
yes.
And we went through southern Illinois, Tennessee, and Kentucky, and one of our first stops down in Centralia, Illinois, this place that we basically needed to stop for the night, so let's see if there's something haunted around. We found a cemetery that has ghost stories. Some are really creepy, including like this scraggly old man that'll come charging at you from out of the woods but vanish before actually striking you. But he actually does seem like he's going to attack you.
Wow.
To these black-eyed children that some people believe they belong in the world of vampire lore. There's been UFO sightings in this area. Even flying cryptids dating back to the ancient times.
Wow.
And standing upright dog humanoid type creatures. So like one little cemetery in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere, has all this craziness going on, which I love stumbling across something like that. Road trips, they take you places.
Scott, let's get down to the crux of it. Have you solved the ghost story that we know is existing in the water tank at the Roosevelt Hotel there in Los Angeles? Have you figured that one out yet for us? Because I'm still watching that video and getting creeped out every couple of weeks by that.
Oh, you're talking about the Cecil Hotel.
Yeah. Oh, the Cecil Hotel.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Not the Roosevelt. The Roosevelt is too upscale. The Cecil Hotel, a little more seedy, and the likely that a place like that would have something awful happen.
Of course,
like
yeah, absolutely. That's. I love talking about that one because it's such a mysterious place with a dark history that really dates back. I know we're going to talk about this movie, but I love being able to intersperse some ghost stories in the middle of it too.
Well, I love it too. Tell us what your take is on that. And my apologies to the Roosevelt Hotel if anybody's listening. It's a lovely hotel. Cecil, not so much. But tell me what your take is on that young woman's disappearance.
So Jeff is talking about Elisa Lam, who is this Canadian foreign exchange student who just a few years ago, this is not too long ago, went missing. And eventually her body was found in the water tank on the roof of the building. And that was only after people began to complain about the poor water pressure they were getting in their hotel rooms.
And the taste of the water, they thought was a little funky too. Oh, my God.
Yeah. And of course, then an investigation began, and there's video, the last known footage of this poor girl. She is seen, and you can YouTube this. You can search it very easily. Her name is Elisa Lam. You could just say Cecil Hotel elevator video, and it would come up because she is seen acting very, very strangely. She's alone in this video. She walks into the elevator. It's a security camera footage right out of The Ring. Or not The Ring, but The Eye, the great Bang Brothers.
Yes,
title.
Oh my God, I love that movie.
Yeah, but she hits all the elevator buttons, which is an odd thing to do. And the elevator doors don't close for whatever reason. And the longer these don't close, the more oddly she acts. At first, she seems very relaxed and comfortable, but she starts to look out into the hallway, very much like she's afraid and hiding from something. We see her step out into the hallway, and she's making these grand gestures, like maybe she's telling some very colorful story, but we never see another person. In time, the elevator doors do close with nobody in it. Of course, we don't know how she got from whatever floor it was that she was on to somehow being in this very restricted part of the hotel in the water tank.
Right. On the roof, I believe, correct?
On the roof, yes,
right,
absolutely.
Right, yeah.
And I did a documentary a couple of years ago about a string of drownings in La Crosse, Wisconsin, right on the border between Wisconsin and Minnesota, where people were drowning. And they seemingly were walking into the river of their own volition, kind of in a trance-like state. So I was asked to cover this story and the paranormal investigation that goes into it as the documentary filmmaker. I thought, well, this is interesting. I've never seen taking ghost hunting into an active crime scene. So yeah, I think this would make a cool documentary. And then I was floored by who it was that requested this investigation. And it was the town's deputy medical examiner. This is the man of science who examines the environment and the bodies and has to scientifically report his findings and come up with a cause for deaths. And he is seeing this happen over and over and over again, about a dozen times. And he thought, this doesn't make sense. The only area I've never looked into is a possible paranormal influence.
Interesting.
And so when I see the Elisa Lam story, I just wonder, is it the same phenomena? I still don't know what exactly was going on in La Crosse and continues to go on, but who knows? Could there be a paranormal, some influence that we just don't understand yet that could override our most basic human instinct of self-preservation?
Right. And she was, some people think that she was maybe being chased by a ghost and hiding from it, or some sort of specter potentially following her through the hallway into that elevator, or maybe just outside the elevator. I will tell you this, now that you mention it, the Cecil Hotel, I know, has been filled with lots of murders over the 20th century and into the 21st. I think almost 20 rather sort of prominent murders and suicides and the like took place there. It also has the dubious distinction of being the place that Elizabeth Short used to go in and have a drink. In fact, she was spotted there a day or so before she was found murdered in 1947, as well as it was a place for all sorts of awful kinds of people who would stay there as sort of transients or whatever, including, of course, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker
yes.
in Los Angeles. My goodness. So, American Horror Story Hotel was loosely based on the Cecil Hotel. Though it's funny, Scott, to your point, it's such a fascinating story that it's amazing that more hasn't been done with it. I mean, the Elisa Lam thing even would suggest all kinds of stuff. I mean, she was found naked, and how she got up there was, like you said, very difficult to, and everything else. And she had no sort of weird behavior patterns per se, or anything that was in her past that would suggest that she would end up in such a terrible state. Yeah. But there you go.
But everybody they watch the video and they think, my God, what is she on? She looks like she's tripping the way she's acting.
Right. She's like, she's high or something.
Exactly. And of course, the autopsy reports came back that she didn't even have alcohol in her system. She was completely 100% sober. I do always want to point out, getting back to the Cecil, that a lot of people attribute the Cecil Hotel to the last place Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, was seen. She was actually, and maybe she had been to the Cecil, but that gets misidentified. Her last time she was ever seen was at the Biltmore Hotel, which is not too far away. But the other fascinating and super skin-crawly thing about the Cecil, in addition to all of these suicides that are well documented, is that, as you mentioned, Richard Ramirez was there while he was still doing some killing.
That's right.
But also, it was the home base for Jack Unterweger, a German serial killer.
Oh, that's right.
Later. So there were two separate serial killers that lived in the same building. I don't think any other place in the world can have that claim.
That's extraordinary. It truly is. Wow, that's spooky stuff. And even spookier is the fact that you know so much about it right off the top of your head. I misinformed our listeners and called it the Roosevelt again. My apologies. But yes, the famous Cecil Hotel. I'll never make that mistake again.
I used to give a tour through LA and Hollywood, so I've just got to explain myself.
I love that. I'll tell you one reason I think I got it mixed up is is up until about, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, the Roosevelt Hotel was a little bit on the seedy side too, and then they redid it all, and then it became this sort of prestigious destination in Hollywood again. But maybe, they've had a few of those hotels that have sort of been turned over from kind of scummy to something almost sumptuous. So maybe I'm getting that sort of my bad hotels mixed up here.
And I really think that the Roosevelt is probably the most haunted building in Hollywood.
That's right.
Without question. So it's not as scary, and it seems to be primarily haunted by people that loved it in life and are still making their presence known, which if you've ever had a drink poolside there, I mean, that's where I'll be in the afterlife too.
Well, we've also talked about the Sunset Tower, which of course supposedly has to this day a ghost that is haunting, I think, the 11th floor. Nobody will talk about it there, but that has been well documented over the decades, and they think it might have been some sort of ingenue who was tossed down some stairs back when the Sunset Tower was an apartment building back in the 30s, but hard to get anybody there to talk about it anymore. Back in the day, you could maybe get some of that on them, but Hollywood has had some creepy stayover places, has it not?
Yeah, and to think that once upon a time there were some dark negative stories that came out of Hollywood. It's hard to imagine.
I can't believe it. What did Kenneth Anger do before that happened? I just don't know. He must have been writing comic strips. Anyway, speaking of horror, which is, of course, our favorite genre, and one that you're an expert at in real life sort of dramas, we're going to be talking about the current horror movie that is sort of blazing up the screen and certainly the box office, taking in about 54 million this weekend, which I'm a little bit shocked at. I think it's maybe based a little bit more on the fact that it's been very, very well promoted. It's a little bit slow out there, and it's coming off of a franchise that has been very well thought of and done good business. And that is, we're going to talk about The Nun. And of course, The Nun is, I think, now the fifth movie technically that is part of the Conjuring franchise. But The Nun is a 2018 American Gothic supernatural horror film that was directed by Corn Hardy and written by Gary Dauberman, from a story by Dauberman and James Wan, who was one of the original guys who brought us The Conjuring and a number of the sort of great horror movies that have been out there for the last decade or so. This is sort of a direct spin-off of The Conjuring 2, the 2016 sequel. And like I said, the fifth installment in this sort of Conjuring universe, which continues to be a little bit confounding, Scott, because they can't get the rights to the casebook of the Warrens enough to be able to tell their stories in ways that, are analogous to what you do and would be very, very fascinating because they're all based in fact and actual history. But it's all tied up in the courts, so they keep doing these tangential films that allow them to ostensibly connect a little bit to The Conjuring and to the Warrens, just in the barest of touches, but keep it sort of as part of the Conjuring universe. Now, this one takes place in 1952, going back to Romania, where there is a unholy secret discovered at a monastery that is occupied by a bunch of nuns, and of course the Vatican gets wind of this young nun who threw herself out the window after seeing some sort of demon. Apparently she tied a noose around her neck and went hurling out their bedroom window. And of course, the Vatican wants to figure out what's going on there. Was this suicide? Was it murder? Et cetera, et cetera. And they send two people to go in and figure out what the hell is going on there. Of course, one of them is this very stern, sort of serious and stoic priest who's had some experience in this. And that is Father Burke. And he's played by Damien Bichir, who is a very acclaimed actor, Oscar nominated back in 2012, I think it was. And then, of course, young star Thaisa Farmiga, who has a history of sort of playing in some of these kind of horror shows because she was in the first season of American Horror Story on FX, and I think she came back for was either the third or fourth season when they did Coven. So it's a sort of a Tony cast, and as they go in to discover this, of course, there's all sort of hellish shenanigans that go on around them. Lots of specters, lots of visions, lots of nightmares. The nun is sort of taken over. I guess the one nun who was killed has been taken over by the spirit of this demon there, and that's the one that we see in the commercials and have seen in the previous movies. And it becomes this sort of, can they defeat the demon? What do they have to do to defeat the demon? And, oh, by the way, there's this very out-of-place comic relief character named Frenchie, played by Jonas Bloquet, who I have to say almost sinks the picture. And not that he's a bad actor. He's a fine actor. He's been good in many things, but his character seems wildly out of sorts. But it's, like I said, a big, successful horror movie, but... Let's talk about it. Did you think it was successful even without the box office, just as an aesthetic piece of cinema, my friend? What is your take on it?
Well, it's funny because you talk about the ghostly shenanigans, and I think we needed a lot more of it because the plot wasn't interesting enough in it of itself. So let's, at least with it, there was plenty of action and crazy stuff going on.
Right.
But I think, and I love the slow pace, the slow build-up horror movies, but usually there's got to be some real plot happening to allow these scenes to be able to drag on and therefore matter more. And there just wasn't enough going on in this movie to support their attempt to build suspense.
No, I totally agree with that, Scott. In fact, this is one of those movies where there's so many things that they do that are kind of right, and then there's so many things that they do just plain god-awful. And I do mean god-awful. That upside-down cross being one of them. How many times do we have to see that? Okay, put that away now, James Wan. We've seen it in all of your movies, and it's old. We get it. Oh, the upside-down cross. That means Satanism. We get it.
There might be a special title, just if you watch the closing credits for Cross Twirler at this point.
They should. I mean, I can't believe they don't have a movie called The Upside-Down Cross. They really should. I agree with you. In fact, I have to tell you, for as strong a premise and as strong a character as they have in this evil-looking sort of nun and a little bit of the history and her haunting, both Lorraine, played by Vera Farmiga in the second one, and other things like that they don't do more with her. And she's even played by the actress Bonnie Aarons, who, of course, was so utterly terrifying in just a smattering of seconds as the homeless hag behind the Winkies Diner in David Lynch's Mulholland Drive almost 20 years ago. And yet here, she doesn't have too much to do. In fact, I have to tell you, I think if there's one indicator of how this script and this movie struggles is we don't see that much of the nun. Now, you could say, well, it's like the shark in Jaws. It's scarier when we don't see her. I disagree, because the demon takes form in all kinds of things here. It takes place as Daniel, the teen boy that Father Burke tried to excise a demon from and failed at. It takes place of all, the demon sort of masquerades as all the other nuns in this monastery. At times it's cascading water or flowing blood or fire. At one point, it even infests the young nun that is played by Farmiga. So, it's not like it couldn't be present more. It's just that they don't even have enough sense or faith, dare I say, to have the nun really be the star in her own movie.
Well, that was something that was interesting to me is, again, to compare it to It, which makes sense because we have the same screenwriter.
Right.
Is it Gary Dauberman? We understand why this demon appears as a nun when Warren sees her in The Conjuring 2, because she is a devout woman who the idea of a nun, this symbol of sincerity and pureness, to be demonic would very much unsettle someone who is a very devout person.
Right.
Well, why is it still a nun in these other scenarios? Especially, as you say, this creature does change to shape to be this sympathetic boy that our father hero character presided over his death accidentally. Why isn't it taking more shapes like Pennywise did?
Yeah, and like even with Sister Irene, who is, of course, not taking her final vows. That's the other thing, too, is, here's my question for you, Scott. It's a big one. I always have this when I watch horror movies. And 9 times out of 10, I walk out of this asking myself this. Do the screenwriters ever watch horror movies? Because I would think that a screenwriter who has even a casual sort of walkabout knowledge of the genre would say, okay, if I'm going to have a priest in it. I can't have a priest who's questioning his faith because he failed to save a boy in an exorcism.
Yeah.
I'd go 180 degrees in the opposite direction. I'd have this superhero exorcist, if you will, who's excised the demon out of 10 kids or 10 people, and he thinks he's invincible, and his ego maybe gets in the way, as opposed to this man who's sort of questioning his faith and doesn't know and has never gotten over that guilt. I'd also not have a virginal nun who isn't quite taken her vows yet, so maybe she could still be Satan's concubine or, Frenchie's concubine, as it seems. He gets over seeing that dead nun hanging there outside the monastery when he delivers his supplies to the monastery the next morning pretty fast, because as soon as Irene shows up, he's drooling like a dog. It's like,
oh my gosh.
I thought I stumbled into a French sex comedy for a while. And suddenly he's forgotten the seriousness of why they're there or what he just saw days earlier. But these are cliches in the Exorcist world, let alone horror. Don't do the virginal nun. Don't do the torn, guilt-ridden priest. My God, anything but.
So you mentioned The Exorcist. It's the opening scene, and it's meant to be a reveal later. We see that there's this evil creature, this evil spirit, and then we see a nun go to the window, apologize for the sin she's about to commit, and jump off the window.
Right.
I think everybody that's remotely savvy to horror movies immediately thinks of the end of The Exorcist.
That's right.
And that is
Father
supposed to be a surprise later. Yeah,
exactly.
That, oh my gosh, she was trying to do the exact same thing that we've seen before, but there was no surprise to that.
Well, not when you're doing the most famous death, if you will, in any kind of movie about exorcism. Certainly not. I mean, it's if you want to imitate and steal from the best, I understand that, but don't steal such an obvious thing as that. The other thing that I don't understand is, they talk a lot about this demon needs to have a human host and all this. Well, at one point there were all these other nuns there. Couldn't he have, gotten inside of them? And they did take their vows. They were all virgins. Instead, somehow towards the last reel, we find out that basically nobody's been there, and all these women that they're talking to who they think are nuns actually working and living in the monastery are just illusions, specters, creatures brought forth by the demon for the sole purpose of conning the living three who go in there to do battle with it. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, this demon is pretty lazy, dumb, or looking in all the wrong places. And I'd questioned what happened to all those people who used to be there. Of course, these three people aren't smart enough even to ask those questions, or the script isn't giving them characters that are smart enough to ask that. There's never any local authorities. There's never any police. There's never any fixers, people with weapons. It's just the two from the Vatican and Frenchie tagging along. But, this is 1952. This isn't the medieval, witch finder kind of era where maybe you wouldn't have anybody out there doing these kind of things because they were all dying from the plague. This is the modern world. I'm sorry, even if it is 70, 80 years ago, it's still the modern world.
See,
they flew there in a plane. It's not like they drove by a cart. And yet there's no nod to electricity, radio, television, phones, nothing. It's like the land that time forgot this monastery.
They even use a lantern at a time they could have used a flashlight,
They did have a flashlight occasionally, but
eventually
they're still using the lamp because the lamp is just so much more effective, isn't it?
There was a scene which I would have loved to see more of, where we see Frenchie in town talking with, the townspeople about that there was another death in town, it was a suicide. They talk about this cursed place where the Abbey is. It brought me back to An American Werewolf in London. But it was really kind of neat to see that, hey, this place is legendary, and it has an impact outside of its walls. And it would have been really cool to see the townspeople maybe get involved, or to see other stuff that was going on in town.
Right. And the thing that's always bothers me in these movies, and I think this is good enough for most people who probably are interested in the genre, and sure enough, they can argue and justify it because they can say, look, we made $54 million. This movie has a lot of mood, a lot of atmosphere. It's got a pretty good budget. I mean, those sets look very believable, and there's a lot of them. Big rooms with high ceilings, and they've created this monster. I don't know if they found a real one to shoot on location, but I'm sure most of that was in Pinewood or someplace like that, and it looks terrific. And you get these two really terrific actors, and they play it straight. They're giving it their all. They're committed to it. But then they're let down by this sort of script, which I have to tell you, here's what I walked out of it thinking, and that is there's one way to enjoy this movie, and only one way. And I think it's intentional, but I also think it's very dangerous for the franchise. I'd like to get your opinion on, Scott. Mm-hmm. I think this one was almost pitched at the level of a Hammer film. The famous British horror movies from the 60s that were a little bit over the top, a little bit arch, just a touch shy of camp, but pretty well done, pretty vivid, lots of jump scares, sort of grotesqueries, broad acting, but they were very effective. But again, it was a time period when horror wasn't quite as sophisticated. It wasn't the respected genre that a lot of horror has become today, with the likes of things like, well, The Exorcist all the way through to, Get Out. I mean, you could go back to Polanski and some of the things. I mean, John Carpenter, even Halloween. I mean, sort of made these really well-respected, critical darling horror films. But this one is, that Frenchie character belongs in another movie. There's no reason that he should be in here, and he's getting big, broad laughs, and they're throwing these characters around like rag dolls, and there's buckets of blood. And I'm thinking, you have an Oscar-nominated actor and 4 other films that were pretty serious. Why is this one being so kind of hell's a poppin'? But I think they pitched it that way, and does it work? It's effective, but it doesn't seem to be true to what we want from horror, and certainly not what The Conjuring is set up with its previous films.
So with Frenchie, I was looking, and of course by the end, we see what his entire storyline is, but I was looking forward to Frenchie being a paranormal Indiana Jones, because that's what he kind of seemed like he was becoming.
Yes.
He's wielding a sawed-off shotgun and just being the adventure hero in this. But it's funny that you mentioned the campiness, because there were times where I was watching it, and again, I think it was actually a time that I saw a character get thrown across the room, and I thought, I would rather be watching Ash versus the Evil Dead right now.
Yeah. In fact, it almost takes on
into it more.
Right, and it takes on a Sam Raimi quality here too, which Raimi fully embraced the comedy of Hammer and horror comedy and pushed it to that right. You're exactly right. It is almost something that Ash would be better fighting with. The other thing too is I kept thinking, okay, if you're going to have this guy who immediately starts drooling after this comely nun in his presence, and he still kind of comes back because he likes her, and there's this kind of pining for her and all that kind of stuff. The least they could do is they could have those two make love together, because she hasn't fully taken her vows, and then maybe she wouldn't be as appealing to the demon because she's no longer the pure virgin that, I thought that would be an interesting way to take that if you wanted to, like, wait a minute, I have to make love to you even though it goes against my vows, but it's the only way I can defeat the demon, and God knows this guy's been drooling after me for the last hour and a half of the film. But they don't even do that. So I'm not sure what they were thinking. I would love to hear what you also think of the fact that, to me, this is getting so far away now from the Warrens and their story. Yeah. Again, I know it's legal. They try to throw it in at the very end. But were you shocked that they don't even make a deal, a mention in the script that Thaisa is the sister of the woman who is playing Warren, Mrs. Warren? And it's like there's got to be some connection. I kept thinking, this is going to be her mother, and she was born to Frenchie and all that. That's why she's there. It's not just because of her IMDb credit, an American Horror Story, but they don't. And I then it starts to take on this element of, is this just a cheap, let's do it because we got to keep the franchise going, and we're starting to sort of throw away all the equity of it. Yeah,
it definitely felt like that. You talk about the paint by numbers of it, and I think a great example is the bell system, which the fear, and which they cover this, and this is a true thing that really existed. And there's even a notable grave in, I think it was in Rhode Island, that has a window in it because the guy was so afraid of being buried alive. There's actually a very famous one in Chicago, too, in Graceland Cemetery. This guy with a great Gothic name, Ludwig Wolf. He, as the legend goes, was afraid of being buried alive. And so you could go to his grave to this day. There is a staircase down into the ground, and there's a ventilation system in case he was ever buried alive. So we establish in the movie this cemetery on the grounds of the Abbey has these bells by the graves because of this fear at the time that people would be buried alive, and you could just ring the bell to hopefully get someone's attention. How much can you choreograph? Okay, what's going to happen here?
Right, exactly.
Somebody's going to be buried. We'll hear those bells ringing. They did some cool stuff with it when the misdirection happened where all the bells start to ring.
Right.
But it just seemed so like, I don't know, you're choreographing it so plainly with no suaveness to it. It was clunky. And that, I think that's a good sample of the bigger picture of how this movie came together.
I think you're exactly right on that, Scott. In fact, you know what I also think that scene shows is a lack of trust in the material. Because to your point about they could just build up this sense of dread, this sense of this demon nun out there, and she's not showing herself too much, but she's sort of doing some evil stuff that maybe we don't entirely see. But in that scene, which I think is pretty effective in the sense that most people probably fear being buried alive,
sure.
And the claustrophobia of being in that coffin with Bashir is very palpable here.
Mm-hmm.
And he's panicking and he's running out of oxygen and he's trying to figure out what's going on. And he's hoping that Sister Irene finds him enough, but all the bells are going off because the demon's playing games. Oh, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that. And can she find him in time? They could have had the ticking clock going, all this to really, really draw that out. And his panic is making him lose breath even more and maybe even passes out. And then she doesn't have the noise but she's got to look for the name on the tombstone. But what do? They gild the lily. They don't have enough faith in that. So the screenwriter and the director decide, well, we'll get a snake in there because it's not enough for the Father Burke to be suffocating or panicked that he's buried alive. No, we're going to have him having to battle a snake to make it even worse. And then you think, well, what else can they do to him? It's like Sideshow Bob when he's underneath, and he's like, what, drives through the cactus thing, and then he hits 27 rakes. Then they have the nun's arms burst through the top of the coffin to sort of strangle Father Burke and rattle him around. And it's just too much. They keep throwing the kitchen sink and everything. By the end, we've got drowning and people thrown against the walls and different characters being bitten by snakes and turning into their demons themselves. And it's just kitchen sink horror, and I hate that. To me, that's always when you know that they've sort of run out of ideas, like, oh, this isn't scary enough. I know, we'll have a big snake bite Father Burke in the eye, because that snake wasn't enough in the one coffin. Now we've got to bring it back and have him bite his eye. What?
What's better than winning a screenplay contest? How about being flown out to Park City during the Sundance Film Festival, or to the jazz capital of the country, New Orleans? How about London, Chicago? And on top of all of that, we will organise a table read of your winning project with a cast of amazing actors and your very own director. To quote past Table Read My Screenplay winner Andy Maycock, it was the highlight of my career thus far, and the prize money was just the icing on the cake. Join us on a trip to some of the most exciting film festivals in the world, all with a focus on you and your prize-winning script. Go to tablereadmyscreenplay.com to learn more, submit, and start the next stage of your screenwriting adventure.
If you set it up in such a way, like let's pretend that the demon Valak was a snake charmer or something, then there'd be a reason for why.
Right.
And those types of little missteps, or not missteps, but just those are opportunities that you would understand it. And because you understand it, you accept it, it's creepier. And that kind of pre-work wasn't done.
That's a great way to think of it, Scott, because actually talking to you, you show all of the, if you will, pre-work that you know and bring to the party because you're an expert at it. And I can even bring up the wrong hotel and you correct me not only on that, but then give me all this and our listeners all this incredible storytelling about what went on at the Cecil Hotel. Here, we're supposed to believe that Father Burke is the one guy the Vatican can send because he supposedly has all this expertise. And yet he doesn't know jack shit. He's got to look and find all these books and figure out what's going on and find out about who this demon Valak is. It's like, well, shouldn't he have known some of this already? Or shouldn't he be really well versed in this? Shouldn't he come to this with all that kind of education? But they send these two people who aren't clowns on the way they're played by these two gifted actors, but they are clowns the way they act through here. I mean, did you not think that was the specter of the nun pretending to be the Mother Superior, sitting there once, not twice, but 3 different times under that veil talking to her? I mean, they even give her a malted, raspy, like mic'd, auto-tuned voice.
Yes.
It's like, are you guys experts at visions and conjurings and everything else? Because I can see that she's not a real person, but you're sitting there going, well, I guess we should come back and respect her because she doesn't want us to, talk to the nuns right now. They're praying. What?
No, that was kind of ridiculous. Another head slapper. Also, getting back to him being buried in the coffin or buried and finds himself when he gets freed finally. That coffin happens to contain all of these books that are valuable for his research. So
Right.
why would the demon attract him to this stuff that's been safely buried and hidden away?
Right. He wants credit for it. I'm really doing all these wonderful stunts and tricks, but you're going to go back and talk about this, and you're going to get my name wrong. So I better give you my IMDb or Wikipedia page so you know how to pronounce my name and tell them all about me, all my nicknames, and he lists off about 3 or 4 of them, which they always do in these things. Like, well, why can't he just have one nickname? That translates to the soothsayer or whatever the heck it is.
Yeah. And then
okay,
with
please.
Irene, Sister Irene, she's, again, like you said, why is this person picked? Well, it turns out she's had visions that, and always with a message at the end that Mary points the way. Again, nail really on the nose with this one. But she, in that panicky moment where all the bells are ringing, and again, that was a very anxious, great, creepy moment when all the bells begin to ring. She goes into her mind and kind of becomes a superhero for a moment there.
Right.
Where she can suddenly just know where it is.
Yeah, she has a vision of it, like she's seen it on a different level.
But this time it seemed, to me at least, it seemed like she was calling on it. She was making that happen.
Right.
I don't really know if that's how it was supposed to come across, but that's how it appeared. Which, again, if you have that kind of omniscient power, why don't we see it some more?
And if she's that good of a seer and visionary, why doesn't she see that when she comes into her room, which has been locked, or at night, there's suddenly another nun in there with her, and she just treats it like, oh, she just happened to come in, wants to talk to me. What? I mean, she won't undress. She sleeps in her clothes. She's smart enough to sleep in her clothes, knowing that she might have to run out at any moment. But then, of course, these people are never smart enough to say, let's just visit this during the daytime when it's not as creepy, or maybe we'll stay in a local, Airbnb in the village there, rather than, I don't know, stay overnight here in this haunted horror show. It's ridiculous. I mean, this is where you want them to be a little bit smarter, because I think audiences would say, okay, I'll still accept some of the maybe boxes that you're ticking in the horror genre cliche book, but everything they do is just for convenience. Well, we don't want them to be too smart because then they wouldn't stay in the castle, and we have to have them there in the castle. Well, we wouldn't have them if they just locked the doors, nobody could get in. So we'll have a specter get in, but we won't have them question it, so it's a scary scene. No, it's a dumb scene because the person is supposed to have visions and doesn't see the thing come in or have any realization that it's, of course, a specter because she locked her door.
I'm telling you, the number of times a really creepy moment happens where suddenly there's someone standing there that shouldn't rationally be standing there, and Irene's character responds by saying, hello.
I know.
It's like, and it happens at least 3 different times. It is Mother Superior at the beginning, in the bedroom there, as you were just talking about, and also at the very end when they're in the catacombs. And obviously there's nobody there, but things to not trust. Suddenly there's something behind her in the catacombs. Oh, hi there.
Right. And how about when she's sitting there still respecting these stupid rules that have been proven to not be anything but bad visions? Like suddenly there's 10 nuns all surrounding her praying, and she's going to respect them as they pray because that's the only thing they can do to ward off the demon. And then they're all knocked over like so many bowling pins.
Yeah.
And then they're not even real and not even there. Well, if this woman is so great on the vision, can't she see the difference between all this? Is the demon that powerful? And if the demon is that powerful that he can even pull the wool over the experience of a father who's had lots of experience with exorcisms and a visionary nun, why can't he just kill them? Why can't he just, you've got the vial of Christ's blood, that's what I want, I need to squelch it so it can't keep me from lording over the manor, I'm going to smash you and it against the wall. But no, it's all this, let's drown you, let's throw you around here, let's get shot, let's keep coming back for more. And it just seems like, again, somebody who wrote this should know better because he's written the adaptation of a Stephen King book and did very well, and he should know this genre better than he does.
And Corin Hardy, the director, he directed the movie The Hollow. which I love.
Right. Yes.
It's a great mythological or mystical, and in the woods also, which kind of felt similar to the cemetery scenes. I love that movie. So how do we get all of this talent together, and did they just not have the time to work it out or something?
Well, that's the other thing too, is, I mean, are they on a schedule? Like, we have to have one of these come out every year and a half, because I have to tell you, I love The Conjuring, as did you. I think it's one of the best horror movies in the last 20 years. And I thought The Conjuring 2 was very well done. I mean, it wasn't quite as startling as the first one, but it was very well done. And it was based on a true story in London, which was interesting as well. I even liked Annabelle and Annabelle 2 Creation. Now, I didn't like the second Annabelle as well, where they go back into the Depression era. But I did like the one that took place in the 60s and sort of touched on the Manson cult and some of that stuff. But I will say this about all four of those movies. They were serious. Now, they were fun in the way that you want serious horror to give you a good time at the theater. But they weren't ludicrous. This one, to me, was ludicrous. I saw it with an audience on a Friday night, and they were laughing more than they were screaming. And that maybe conjures up $54 million at the box office one weekend, but I doubt it'll repeat that the second one, because I can't believe word of mouth on this is good. And that makes me wonder what these people were thinking. Did they say, you know what, we're tired of doing this serious thing. We can't use the Warrens. Hell, let's just do an homage to Hammer. I mean, if that was their motive, I'd believe that better than them saying, let's set out to do a really good horror movie, and this is what they came up with.
Yeah, well, it's funny because what was frustrating to me was that tried to toe the line too much. Like, if you're gonna go for it, go for the campy, cheesy silliness. It was kind of just in this weird in between gray area, which felt kind of frustrating as an audience member to watch.
And it's funny too, Scott, because I mean, it's one of those things that, I mean, it's easy for us to sort of Monday morning quarterback, but I'm sorry, you know, somebody else should be Monday morning quarterbacking this in the studio, because they aren't involved with it every second of the day, and they're the people who are supposed to come in and read it and say, well, you know, they have readers too, just as we have for contests and everything else. Where's the reader? Where's the objective studio head? Where's the producer who says, you know how we can do this, make this better? I mean, here's the obvious thing that I thought they were doing with this, and they blow that even. I thought, okay, you can't do the Warrens casebook right now because you don't have the legal rights to all of their estate. So you need to create two other paranormal experts. Now, you don't get Scott and Wendy to do this, but what you do is you get an exorcist and a visionary nun. Got it. Yeah. But they don't even have that many scenes together. Throughout most of the movie, the real scares come with them acting solo. Even when, you know, that famous scene that everybody jumps at and was very effective in selling the movie in the trailer, where, you know, Sister Irene is going down the dark hallway, and she hears a voice say, "Sister, over here," which she should not have listened to, because by that point she can't listen and believe in anything. But she does it anyway. And, you know, then there's the nun behind her, and you think, oh, the nun's going to grab her, and she kind of walks away from it, trying not to pay attention to it, and the nun follows her, and then of course, boom, it grabs her from another side, so it's a big shock, jump scare. But where's the father and all that? He's off doing his own battles. And finally, the three of them come together. But I thought, here's this opportunity where you could have the next franchise, if you can't get these Warren stories, with this roaming priest and this young nun who are kind of your new paranormal experts. But they never give them enough time to really build up a camaraderie, a father-daughter kind of relationship. I would argue that she almost has more relationship with Frenchie in it, because at least we know he's interested in her. I'm not ever convinced that Burke wants her there, or he's getting any real aid from her. Again, they're acting in isolation, which makes you almost wonder, did they, you know, sign on for separate weeks because they had too many other projects going on, and they couldn't get those two actors in the same room for more than 4 days? You wonder. I mean, Hollywood does that sometimes, and I wonder if this is one of those instances.
Yeah, it was a little Portia de Rossi, Arrested Development scenario going on.
That's right. I mean, how many times have they done that with, one of the most famous ones, of course, is Sin City, where half those people were never in the scenes with the people they were in the scenes with.
Totally.
You know, they just, can you come down? Yeah, I've got 3 days. Okay, great. We'll shoot y'all. Wait a minute. Don't I have scenes with Bruce Willis? We'll put it in post.
The Frenchie character, as far as the relationship with Irene, although, you know, you were very right when you brought it up early, where he is just fresh off of discovering this horrific sight of a nun hanging from the abbey window. And of course, he gets there just in the nick of time to watch the rope break and hit the ground. As traumatic as that was, and he just wakes up from a nightmare of it too. Oh, hey, there's a chick at the door. Well, I'm into suave mode immediately now. But then then there's kind of a funny moment where he then finds out she's a nun. He's like, oh gosh, I guess I gotta button up a little bit. But that moment is here and gone in a heartbeat. He's back to flirting with her throughout the rest of the movie. And after that, it worked at first, but then it's like, well, you haven't taken the vows. It came off super creepy, actually.
And I think one of the unfortunately very unintentional laughs is at the end when they show that Frenchie is now carrying the demon in. Of course, they haven't vanquished the demon. The demon has gone into the human soul and taking over that, and it's Frenchie. It was surprise. But then you see him in this video, which takes you back to the very beginning of the first Conjuring, where the Warrens are giving a lecture at a college class, and they show some video. Well, in that case, it was film, 8mm film of what they had done as far as dealing with somebody who was possessed, and it's Frenchie. And suddenly this comical character, for the one time in the entire movie, is sort of this demonic, tortured person. And it doesn't work because there's nothing in him that would really allow that when he's played as not only the goofball, but also the sort of aw shucks, almost silent movie comedian type of romantic lead that a Buster Keaton would be.
Yeah.
This sort of sad sack ding-a-ling, and then suddenly, now he's just this terrible demon-possessed fellow. What?
Well, I guess, that's interesting because I never thought about it from the demon's standpoint. Why would Frenchie be the next target? And maybe it was just process of elimination because nothing else was working out. But I did like how they tied it together, and it kind of made you understand why now the demon is in Elizabeth Warren's world, I guess.
Lorraine Warren. I think you're thinking of our senator.
Yes.
she's fighting her own demons. The reason you're thinking of it is it's close to Ed and Lorraine Warren. But
there you go. It's their couple's name.
By the way, you've read plenty of scripts, and you know the horror genre backwards and forwards. This is for some of the screenwriters out there too. Is I think if you're going to create ideas in any movie, but in particular horror movies, they really have to be paid off better than they are here in this movie. For example, that hanging nun, and they make a big deal of that blood being fresh and that it should have been dried up by the time the exorcist and the nun arrive. So why isn't it? We never really get a great answer on that. We don't really understand exactly all the things about what happened to the nuns and the people who were in the monastery. I mean, Frenchie's still bringing deliveries every day of food and various, sundries. Who's using those? I mean, is the demon just saying, I'm throwing them out back with the rest of the junk? You should see the landfill I've got going. Just ideas that are brought up that never go anywhere. And I think that any good screenwriter, let alone any good screen reader, would catch some of those things and say, if you're going to make a big deal that, you have to explain that. You can't just let it drift away, because it's not enough to say, well, it's scary that the blood would still be wet. Well, yeah, it is scary, but why is it still wet? And make it pay off. I mean, even at the end, and of course we give everything away in this show, but when Sister Irene is battling with the demon underwater, and the vial full of Christ's blood breaks, and then lo and behold, Irene's got it in her mouth, and she spits it out right into the face like it's the alien acid. You know,
it's the most epic spit take ever.
Yeah, it is. It's like, I tell you, Danny Thomas was rolling over in his grave with jealousy over that spit take. But I know that it's kind of a surprise reveal and all that kind of stuff, but it's corny and it doesn't really make sense. And I mean, how did the thing break anyhow? I'm not saying you have to show that, but it beggars a question, because you start to say, well, if it broke in the water, it would dissipate in the water. And unless she had it break in her mouth, and you know what I mean? There's just weird. Yeah. It's a great shock. Oh, cool, she won. But like when Bruce Willis comes in at the end of Die Hard, and he's got that one gun taped behind his back. They explain how that works and how he uses that his last two bullets or whatever he's got to get both Hans and the other henchmen. You have to give us a little bit of a setup on some of those kind of things. Otherwise, I think you feel ripped off, because you could say, well, that could be anything. I mean, I just watched 8 hours of Sharp Objects on HBO, and Jean-Marc Vallée, the director of that, and the screenwriters set up every last thing. If you're watching, paying very close attention, it's all set up. It's all there. It all is paid off. It all has meaning. They don't do a quarter of that here, and they only had to do an hour and a 45-minute film.
Well, the great thing about those moments, the potential great thing, is that every time you come across something in a screenplay and you think, well, why did that happen? That doesn't make sense. Why did they say this, or why did that action take place? That's an opportunity for you. I did an independent film, a comedy, a feature that I co-wrote and directed years ago. It's an office comedy. One of the characters is kind of a goofus, a very fun Jim Carrey type of character, goofing off to the boss and all that, who is a tight-lipped, straight-laced person. And one of the people that came in and read for the boss said, why the hell would I put up with this person?
Yep.
And I thought, shoot, I don't have it in the script why you would put up with this person. So now I got to create a reason for him to be like unfireable. And then that's something more that we can have fun with within the comedy of it.
Right.
And that happens over and over again in any type of a screenplay. The fact that we're asking why this, this doesn't make sense, why did this not pay off? Those are all opportunities to make this movie so much creepier.
It is. And the sad part about it is, Scott, I think that because it did so well this weekend, because it has the prestige of The Conjuring's name going for it, the fact that you have this very strong cast, the fact that you've got this very creepy figure, which, let's face it, there aren't a lot of those sort of boogeymen left. I mean, the Freddy Kruegers, the Mike Myers, the Jason Voorhees, we keep returning to them. And of course, there's a new Halloween coming out because we haven't brought anything up that's close to that. I mean, they did 2 movies about a damn doll, for God's sake. Even it was scary, but it's still inanimate, ladies and gentlemen. So here you've got a real creepy looking nun, and nuns are kind of scary in their strict worlds and all that anyway. And she's not in it enough, but this just seems to be done so cynically and so unsensitively, and yet it makes all this money. And I think it'll tell everybody, well, as long as I have atmosphere and about 20 really easy jump scares that'll get people to sort of rattle in their seat, I've got a horror movie that'll be successful. And in the box office, but as an aesthetic piece of work, not so much. And the shame of it is this is just a couple rewrites from being a script that could have been really good. So again, I don't know if they were rushing this or what happened there, but it could have been so much better with just some of those questions being asked, like that guy asked you about the doofus, the goofus at the office and stuff. Why does it have to always have him be guilt-ridden? Why is this? Why are they, all those kind of things. I mean, why aren't they just smarter? Kolchak was a smarter reporter going in fighting the vampire in Vegas back in 1972. I'm sorry, but that's 50 years ago. We have to be smarter than that when we write these films now if we want to follow these heroes. Again, I think the quickest way to lose an audience in a horror movie is to have heroes that are dumb. And these two play it very straight, which helps. It makes them seem like they're smarter and more heroic than they are, but they're actually pretty badly and stupidly written characters.
It will be interesting to see, because like you said, it did have a big opening weekend. It was the number 2 all-time September and R-rated opening, I think.
I know, shocking, isn't it?
But I just read that its cinema score, which is what the audience is giving it, not the critics, but just the average moviegoer, it got a C rating. Yeah. And usually audiences are very easy to impress. So the fact that this movie got a C, we'll see how it affects. Maybe horror movies don't get affected as much by word of mouth because, hey, it's a thing to do when the weather starts to get cooler. You want to go see whatever horror movies out there. But there's a chance this might not have a good second weekend based on that.
That's very perceptive of you, Scott. And I have to say, I think one of the things that is happening in film these days, and it's maybe a good thing on the one side, not so much good on the horror side, but I think really scary thrillers are sort of starting to make a comeback. And I mean, I think some of that happened with things like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and, Gillian Flynn's work with both Gone Girl in the movies as well as Sharp Objects, which Blumhouse is one of the producers of, because it's kind of a thriller / horror in its way, even though it's not the typical feeling of, what we think of as the genre. I would argue that right now, Searching, this movie with John Cho as the father who's looking all online for his missing teen daughter, I think was terrifying. And it's all happening in the broad daylight. It's all happening basically with him sitting at a computer screen, and it nailed me to my seat and had me on the edge of that seat the entire hour and 45 minutes of that one. So yes, it's great to have all the atmosphere and the dark castles and, the specters and, graves and stuff like that. But I think there's other ways to scare people. And this one could have, capitalized on having all that great accoutrement, but it doesn't have the script for it. I think that's the C cinema score, because it's too laughable. And, if you're going to go for Hammer, I think you need to do it like Edgar Wright did when he did the parody of Don't in the middle of Grindhouse. He's got a real knack for knowing how to push that. And even Shaun of the Dead was sort of in that Hammer vein, albeit more satirical. But I wish he would do Don't, because I think that would be a perfect homage to Hammer. This is almost like doing Hammer without nearly as much sort of chutzpah to it. It's all over the top, hell's a pop and stuff, but it's not quite the same, and the script just lets it down.
Oh, yeah. I would definitely be ready for another Joss Whedon return to horror.
Yes. I know. Bring back, some of the Evil Dead stuff. I think there's a place for it, certainly better than this. But I'm just hoping they get that case book. Those lawyers at Warner Brothers better get their shtick together, the stick, or whatever I want to say, their shtick together on the stick, because it's ridiculous that we are now 5 movies into this and ostensibly only 2 have been with the Warrens. That's silly for a franchise. They should be embarrassed about that. Yeah,
and there is even a release date already for the next movie in this universe, July of 2019, so not that far off. I don't think there's too much that's been announced about it yet, so it'll be interesting to see. Is it going to be brand new characters? Are we going to see something more with the nun priest duo, or do we actually get to see Ed and Lorraine again?
Fascinating. And heaven forfend the 2 sisters should be in a movie together, somehow related.
Yeah.
Even though we can figure out that they're connected as well as the natural world, but somehow the movie misses the opportunity. Anyway, Scott, it's been such a pleasure talking to you once again. I always feel like your world would make much better horror stories than anything.
You have no idea.
In the theater. So you've got to write one down. I'm just even you Scott and Wendy visit the Cecil Hotel, and what you find would be creepy enough. The fact that she was naked too, that's the unsettling thing about it, right? Not just that she was this young co-ed, and she seemed to have this strange vision or some sort of behavior in the elevator, but then she ends up in, of all god-awful things, the water tank. Like somebody decided to deposit her in the water supply, and of course she's nude. I don't think she was taking a bath up there and fell asleep, or, end up drowning accidentally.
That's what's
really lurid.
The interesting thing about this case is that it's listed as accidental drowning, and it's a closed case. There's no investigation into it. So, but anybody that looks at the case and looks at that video knows that, well, there's a lot left to be explained, and we can't say it's paranormal, but what the hell is it?
I know, it's really strange. By the way, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, because you would maybe be one of the only people who could appreciate this, but there is one category that I can't believe they haven't done more movies of, because there's so much history of it, hundreds of years of it, let alone weirdness that gets associated with all sorts of skullduggery today, whether it's real or not. But and that is the Illuminati. We only have Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut that really sort of touches on some of that kind of stuff. But going back to the Rothschilds and what they did back in, the ruling class and for the 300 years or whatever it's been, it's extraordinary. And yet that's one of those things that's franchise ready, baby.
Jeff, who do you think owns the studios?
Oh, no. That's right.
You need a good budget for that, and those are the people that would give you that budget.
We like your idea. We just don't like the name. Oh, really? Yes, you must change it to something else. Okay.
Yeah, you gotta Animal Farm it and just be all symbolic.
I gotcha. Oh, yes, of course. It was so staring me right in the face with like that one good eye, and I missed it. How did I miss it?
There you go. Nice.
Well, Scott, tell us where we can follow you online, because again, you're going to only have better stories for us to follow in the genre.
Well, I do want to give a quick shout out to your friend Allison Bree, because I know she's listening. Congrats on your awesome success with that, Jeff. Getting your retweet from little Miss Zoya the Destroyer herself.
That's right. She liked my caricature and reposted it on Instagram.
That was so cool, man.
Thank you.
Huge fan of her and Glow, of course.
Yeah, me too.
But well, obviously the ISA, networkisa.org, is where you come for all of your screenwriting needs. But if you've got some ghost hunting needs, or ghost story needs, really, it's whatsyourghoststory.com. And YouTube as well. Just look up my name, Scott Marcus. That will probably be the easiest way to find me. But all over social media, What's Your Ghost Story?
Excellent. And to your point about Network ISA, that's where you can find all of the cataloged podcasts of years past, and you've been a guest on a number of them, which is great. One of these days we have to have you and Wendy on, maybe a romantic comedy or something. We can talk about young lovers and you and Wendy can fill us in all it or something. But we should have
if Ghost gets remade or something, then we can have a romantic paranormal movie.
I should have brought you in for Crimson Peak, but I don't think you were with Wednesday at that time. But yeah, we'll figure out something.
Gothic one, yeah.
Yes, that's a very underrated horror movie. Everybody talks about Guillermo and The Shape of Water, which was lovely and wonderful, but he really got kind of robbed for the effort that was Crimson Peak, a terrific film.
I always want to mention, too, because I don't do this often, but I really enjoy when I get the opportunity to do a little series I called A Ghost Hunter Watches, which is where Wendy and I will watch a supernatural horror movie and then react to it from the point of view of ghost hunters and researchers, and then talk about where the truth is, what's plausible, what's real. And the next one we're going to do, we haven't even recorded it yet, but we just got back from the Bell Witch Cave in Tennessee.
Oh, wow. I'm there for that one.
So we will be looking at the movie An American Haunting.
I love it. I love that. That sounds exciting. Well, of course, in addition to all the past podcasts that I've hosted, I also am the film critic for Creative Screenwriting Magazine online. So just go to creativescreenwriting.com. I also have, I think it's about to start the 8th year of my movie blog, The Establishing Shot. So that's where you can follow me, as well as on Instagram if you want to follow Jeff York Caricatures or Jeff York Writer. And I also have Jeff York Writer as my Twitter handle. But Scott, it's always a pleasure talking to you. We'll have to have you on soon again. I know there's some other horror movies coming out this fall in the Halloween season. Yeah. Maybe you can come back and talk to us about the new Halloween. That would be fun.
Yeah, it would be cool. Absolutely.
All right.
Always
it's
a pleasure,
date.
Jeff.
It's a date. A pleasure with you too, Scott. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this edition of Page to Screen.